In this video we talk about an Italian war game, Corpo, Truppe, Volontarie, Santander 1937. This is a game that comes with the latest issue of the Parabellum magazine, an Italian war game magazine. So the magazine is in Italian, which may be an obstacle for some of you, but the war game is playable by non-native speakers, by non-Italian speakers in general, simply because English rules are available online and there's a player aid which is double-sided Italian and English. So you may consider getting the game in any case, even if you're not going to read the magazine. The game is about the Spanish Civil War, always interesting because it is a topic that is not very represented in wargaming, and it is in particular about the northern eastern section of the conflict in which Italian volunteer groups played an important role. It is a two-player game, but it is also solitaire-friendly. It travels light because, again, most magazine war games do. And this is why actually I have it with me here. I'm on vacation with my family in Italy these days. I'm filming from our vacation house, which is why the background is different from the usual, a little bit bare. Probably you're hearing a little bit of echo, and I hope you don't mind too much. So here we have a game that is good for the traveler also because although it is a two-player game, it works well as a solitaire game if you're playing the game controlling both sides at the best of your possibilities and studying the strategies, seeing the narrative that develops. So without further ado, let me show you how the game works. The game is played on the paper map that you see here, nothing too fancy, but definitely good enough, it gets the job done. A very important feature is this line here, the initial front line. During setup, the Republicans will set up on this side and the Nationalists on this other side, and they need to make sure that each hex of the front is covered by a combat unit or by a zone of control projected by a combat unit. There will also be some other units here in the back ready to fill in the gaps, but most of the action is around the front. And then also we have mountains that will offer protection to the player defending in them, mostly the Republican player. The hills, so we have hills, again, some protection. What really is important is these areas that you see here marked with stars. These are victory area, and really the game is about controlling these areas. Not only that, is not only do you win by controlling a certain number of those areas, but also control of victory areas affects the Republican morale. There will be a marker that will be placed here at the beginning of the game. As the nationalists gain ground, also the marker goes up and gives a modifier to the Republican morale die roll. When the Republican side takes losses, the player, the owning player, needs to roll a die, apply the modifier, and well, based on the result, different things, all bad, may happen. Maybe there will be no effect. Maybe there will be a modifier on combat result. Usually, after combat, you can choose to convert a step loss, one of the step losses that you have taken, into a retreat. If you fail the Republican morale die roll, then actually you have to take every step loss as a casualty. You have to take step losses as actual step losses. You cannot turn them into retreats. If you really fail the morale die roll by a lot as a Republican player, you actually have to both take all of your step losses and then also retreat, which can have a pretty bad effect. Another important thing about the map, again, we set up all around here, is that there are some units that really care about what happens in this area of the map. Historically, these units surrendered, I should say negotiated a peace once the nationalists had advanced enough and taken control of this area. That means that if in fact the nationalist player manages to advance enough in this direction, some of the combat units, very good combat units that the Republican player controls at the beginning, will be replaced by immensely inferior reserve units. So that is very important. The nationalist player will want to take advantage of that by inflicting some early losses on this side of the map. As for combat units, most combat units have an attack factor, a defense factor, and a movement factor, and here on the side a stacking points. There is a limit of 4 stacking points per hex. Also, some units have multiple steps, so when they take a casualty, they're flipped to the reduced side. A lot of other units are pretty brittle. They don't have a reduced side. When they take a hit, they're removed. And most of these brittle units, which may be very powerful when at full strength, go down very easily, and many of those units are on this side. You have some trenches, fortifications, and then you have a lot of different types of units that can contribute to bombardment, which is a way of mollifying the other side before you perform an attack or before you have to defend against an attack. The two sides have air units such as this one that simply are committed to produce modifiers, to produce bombardment points. There are supply columns that can be moved on the map. They have a movement value. They can be moved on the map as normal units, and then their turn on this side to produce bombardment points. You have headquarters that also are moved on the map. They have a defensive value, and again, they can be used to produce bombardment points. And we'll see how that works in a little bit. As for turn structure, it is as shall we say, classic as it can be. Turn structure, combat, this is really a game that is meant to be pretty simple to play, I believe. It has a classic linear mechanics that any wargamer has seen a number of times before, but hey, there's nothing against a game that is actually easy to learn and to play. So, of course, the combat units will be on the board during gameplay, and during gameplay what happens is that, again, very classic, one side moves and resolves combat, then the other side moves and resolves combat. You have to take into account supply lines. You don't want to be caught out of supply, but again, in general, very simple. To give you more of an example, I just placed units kind of randomly. Don't hold it against me if things don't make much sense here. What happens again? One side gets to move units. You can move any and all of your units up to the full movement allowance. Terrain will define the expenditure points for each hex that you enter. Also, all units, combat units, project zones of control in the 6 hexes surrounding them, and so you have to stop when you enter one such hex. This is very important, especially for the defender that will want to play with the axis a little bit to try to stretch the front as much as possible and to slow down the advance of the enemy. And for the nationalist player, on the contrary, well, you're trying to punch holes and to open gaps in the front and then to outflank your enemies, both because that is a good way to get to the objective areas where you want to go, and also because you get bonuses for cutting supply lines and attacking from multiple directions. So you move, and then after your side has moved, you declare attacks. Attacks are non-mandatory. You may spend bombardment points before you resolve your main attack. You commit bombardment points from various sources. The defender may also spend resources to produce bombardment points, in which case the side that has the fewest bombardment points subtracts those points from the bombardment points of the opponent, and the side that still has a positive value will get to roll on the bombardment table. You have a player rate, which is bilingual English and Italian. Oh no, I destroyed the front here. So you roll on the bombardment table, and you simply here you use the column is defined, is decided based on the bombardment points. To the left, after you subtract those of the opponent, roll a die, compare, and then you will hopefully inflate levels of disorganization. Maybe basic disorganization, which simply reduces the factors of the affected units, maybe disorganization level 1 or level 2 that come with progressively worse penalties. After you perform that, if you decide that you have that element, you will resolve the main combat. Then you total all of the combat points of the attacker, the attack points of the attacker, divide by the defense value of the defender, turn that into a ratio. Yes, I told you it was classic, right? So we had a combat table based on combat odds, and you choose the column that best describes the situation. Say the attacker is attacker with 2-1, with twice the strength, twice the attack points of then the defense points of the defender. 3-1, 4-1, 1-1, that's bad. You roll the die, you apply modifiers, you can read them here, and then you simply cross-reference the result, and you see what are the losses for the attacker, those are on the left side of the slash, and those for the defender. Again, the defender could choose to convert one step loss into a retreat unless there are penalties based on a failed Republican or a failed morale roll, and then you have the table that tells you what happens exactly. You have a look at the terrain effects chart. This is the general idea. Again, very basic. Move, attack, make sure you don't mess your supply lines. You need to demonstrate that you're able to trace lines of supply that are free of enemy units and enemy zones of control to supply sources that are on the sides of the map. Repeat that. Move, attack, check your supply lines, move, attack, check your supply lines, and see who manages to win at the end of the campaign, at the end of 7 turns, based on control of key locations on the map. I like this game quite a bit, especially for a magazine game. Magazine games, of course, are their own genre. We don't expect them to be the most amazing games ever, the ones with the deepest and most complex rules, the ones that give us the most epic experience, the ones that you can bring on a desert island because the replay value is infinite. They are their own genre of games that you very often play just after you read the magazine to get a better sense, a better understanding of the events described in the articles in the magazine. And you play them a couple of times. The advantage is that they usually have fairly accessible rules. They're not too complex, 8, 10, 12 pages of rules. And the important thing is that fun to be played for a couple of times. This is a good wargame magazine in that sense because it is accessible. The rules are not complex and not long. In fact, it's very linear, very basic wargame. And big advantage is that this is a good wargame for beginners. If you never played a wargame, this is going to be your first wargame ever. This is not going to be too daunting to play. So it has the advantage of that, of not being very complex, of being very portable. It is very thematic, definitely it feels very thematic, although again the general core of rules is so simple, linear, straightforward. It still feels very flavorful historically and thematically because of the different composition of the units on the two sides of the conflicts, because of the terrain on the map, because of other unique rules. I only mentioned some of those, but those rules really add some nice historical elements there. And in that sense, the game really works well. The conflict is quite unequal because, well, one side strongly is on the defensive, one side strongly is on the attack. One side, of course, the nationalists have a huge advantage in terms of resources, of numbers, of strength, of supplies, but they also have the burden of the attack. They're pushing, they have to make their way through those objectives, which they will. It's not a matter of, well, the Republicans blocking them or not. It's a matter of the Republicans delaying the opponent enough and successful enough if they want to win. As the Republican side, you will take some horrific damage. You will have to worry about filling in the gaps in your line. You will have to worry about when to trade space for human lives, when to retreat, and when to take losses instead. Very often you will try to retreat, but also that is not an automatic decision, because if retreating means to give up an important location such as Santander, maybe you will think twice or thrice about that. So there are interesting decisions on both sides. Apparently, at first sight, you will get the impression that playing the nationalist is the most fun part, because that's where you're studying the enemy front, you're trying to puncture in that front, you're trying to widen gaps. And that also has, again, its own challenges, because the opponent will want to use terrain and mountains and trenches and fortifications as assets to make your work hard. So you have that puzzle of, well, how and where do I really concentrate my forces and break through? Concentration of forces is very important. If you attack uniformly across all the front, you're not really gonna go very far. So you have to make decisions, you have to prioritize, and as you go, you're still in a position of superiority, but you will take some horrific casualties also as the nationalist side. Because basically, most units in the game have a good defense. Some units have great attacks, some units terrible attack, but all units across the board consistently have a good defense. So as the attacker, you're the one always going against that. You will take some casualties, but also your units as the nationalist players are much tougher. They're able indeed to take more punishment before they disappear than the units of the opponent. So the nationalist side has that interesting elements to deal with, and the Republican side, again, is not just retreat on the mountain, sit there and be on autopilot, because then gaps will occur, and then it's about moving units effectively and quickly from one part to the other, filling in the gaps. It is, again, about deciding when to retreat and when to accept a loss. At the beginning, the game gave me a sort of like World War I feel, almost like trench warfare, just a single line, they move slowly, but that actually turned out not to be the case, because parts of the line started collapsing fast, and so it was about scrambling around. It started from a World War I sort of like trench warfare with that sort of like shape and slow pace, and it turned into a frantic multifocal conflict in which there were different things going on all the time, units moving from one center of the action to another, say, island of frantic action. So I like that quite a bit. Both sides turn out to have interesting things to do and interesting decisions to make. The one small negative that I have, which is again not unusual in wargame magazines, but I have to bring it up as a conscientious, as somebody who's trying to give you as honest and accurate a review as I can. The replay value is probably not that great, because there is this dominant strategy. Making sure that the units that belong to the Basque section of the Republican front, making sure that those units leave the conflict as soon as possible, is such a powerful option. There's no reason not to take advantage of it. It's a small investment with such a huge payoff. So as the nationalist player, chances are that you will want to have a decent front somewhere, pretty much everywhere, but you will want to do a major push from the eastern side of the board, make that side collapse, force those other units of that faction that is affected by that sub-rule to leave the board. Then you're weakening the enemy front, and then you give your final push. And that's fine. It is a game that lasts 7 turns, so it is a game that plays in about 2 hours, probably less, after both players or the solitaire player is very familiar with the idea. So it's not like you play 12 hours and the first 3 have some decision in them, and the last 9 are on autopilot. It's kind of the opposite actually here. The first couple of turns, maybe 2 turns, as you're trying to to trigger that rule as the nationalist player. It will be, I don't say scripted, but will follow a clear pattern, and then it is about how both players react to that event, the huge advantage that the nationalist side has gained, and the terrible challenges that now the Republican side is facing. I almost wonder if there couldn't be a scenario that starts from turn 3, say, when that has already occurred, when the Republican forces are already reduced, and you go from there. But it's not a problem really. Again, it won't be. Don't if you're going on a desert island, unless you're incredibly passionate about this topic, this is probably not the war game that you want to bring with you. But you'll play 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Maybe then you leave it on the shelf for a while, and maybe you pick it up later, and it feels fresh again. It is just a game that, because of its commitment to that important turning point in the historical events, has a limited replay value. But other than that, it is a game that works well. It has a solid set of rules, so very familiar to the veteran wargamer, definitely easy to learn for the beginners wargamer. It has historical flavor, it has interesting gameplay challenges and dynamics. So again, to me, the fact that it has a limited replay value is not that big of a minus. It may not be a game that I will play very often in the future, but it is a game that I enjoy playing up to this point, and so I'm happy for that. So, Corpo, Truppe, Volontarie, Santander, 1937. It is an interesting and fun way of exploring a conflict which is not very represented very often in wargaming. It is a fun war game in its own, so in general, I recommend it, although with that caveat about replay value. But, in general, it is a pretty good war game.